What's up YouTube? Welcome to another episode of Project Ventures, and today what we're going to be looking at are the different strategies that you can use when thinking about building a fleet on Turo. So if you're new to Turo, you may have heard and you may have read about a few different strategies that hosts use to kind of maximize their profit and choose which car they're going to build their fleet with. In this video, what I'm going to be doing is comparing the main three different types of models that people use and kind of listing what I think are the pros and cons on each of the models. And at the end, I'm kind of letting out what I think is the best model for a Turo host or someone thinking about starting on Turo. Before we get into the video, like I always say, if you do enjoy this content, please don't hesitate to like the video and also subscribe to the channel. It massively helps out me in creating these videos. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay guys, so the first thing you have to decide when thinking about hosting on Turo is what is your main objective for putting a car on the platform. So there's two kind of main slots that people fall into for this, which is one, to be able to afford and drive their dream car, and secondly is to make money on the platform from renting out cars. So just looking at the dream car before we get into different strategies to make money. So the dream car, a lot of people do this and have great success with this. Say if they want to buy their dream Tesla, their dream Porsche, what they'll do is they'll buy that car new or lightly used, and then they'll rent it out on the Turo platform for 1 to 2 years, and effectively that will pay off the cost of the car. So after the 1 to 2 years, what they're left with is a Porsche or a Tesla or whatever that car may be, and obviously they had to put nothing towards it, and the car is effectively free, say to say. That's absolutely an awesome strategy if that's what you're looking to accomplish from this. Personally, that's not something that I'm trying to do when I'm renting on Turo, but I know a lot of people who have been successful at this, and if that's what you want, that's a great strategy. The only thing I would say is just be cautious. Obviously, high insurance costs, one, for a high value car, and secondly, there is going to be a lot of damages and dings to your car. So if you're really looking for that dream car experience, just keep that in mind. Okay, so let's move on to the strategies to make money on the platform. So the way I see it, there's three main strategies. They break down into the shooter model, which is kind of the low tier, the second, which is the Steady-Eddy model, and the third is the luxury. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is breaking down each of these so-called models and then looking at the pros and cons of each of them. So the first one, a lot of people use this tactic. It's called the shooter model. So pretty much what this is cheap and cheerful car rentals. So the objective of this is to buy a car for a very low purchasing price, be approximately around $3,000 to $5,000, and also with that charge a low daily rental price. So we're looking at about $20 to $25 depending on the car and the market. So with this model, you're kind of looking to have a high volume of cars. So quite a lot of these shooter cars, as to say, and with that, a high utilization on each of the cars. Most of these cars are catering towards locals who just need a car. And obviously the objective is just to buy these cars when they're fairly old and just keep them renting on Turo as much as possible until it doesn't make financial sense to do the repairs or maintenance necessary to keep the car going. So looking at the pros of this model, the first one is that dings and dents don't matter. If you've got an old car, say it's a 2011, 2010 or whatever it may be, you probably don't care if it gets scratches or dings as much as you would if it was a brand new Porsche or Mercedes or whatever that car may be. So that's a great thing, is you don't have to worry about the wear and tear that's going to happen on your cars. Secondly, there's a very low initial investment for these cars. So you can get started with a Turo kind of business with very little money, around $3,000 to $5,000. You can start seeing positive cash flow very, very quickly. Thirdly, you have potentially lower car insurance due to the low value. These cars also tend to have a high ROI. So from what I've read and communicated with other hosts that do the shooter model tend to have great ROI on these cars and normally tend to pay these cars off between 8 to 10 months. And then lastly, the older cars tend to be simpler fixes. So if something does go wrong, it's normally cheaper and a lot easier to fix them. This is really important if you're looking to fix your cars yourself to save money on that. So looking at kind of the negatives from the shooter model, you're going to have a lot of cars. So more cars definitely equals more problems. That's going to equal kind of more communication with guests, more check-in, more check-out, and just a lot more manpower needed to run the platform and run the cars. Secondly, old things break. So obviously with this, there's going to be a lot more of breakdowns and issues like this. This is the biggest red flag, which I'm not really interested in the shooter model. The last thing I'd want is for a guest to break down, say 200 miles, 300 miles away from my home. It becomes a massive headache for me to coordinate getting the car back and kind of get it fixed up and ready to be rented again. Thirdly, you got to understand the expectations of $20. So $20 is a very low daily rate for a car, but guests will always have a high expectation. So if you're having a shooter model and some of your cars have some quirky characters about them, so certain things don't work, certain big dents, big scratches, you may be getting bad reviews from guests who expect a perfect car. These cars are also going to require a lot of maintenance from them. So if you're not handy and you're not planning to do that yourself, just keep that in mind because those costs can quickly add up. Fifthly, you've got the tag and title cost services. So on Turo, you're allowed to rent a car to about 130,000 miles. So if you're buying some of these older cars that say 80 to 100,000 miles, that tag and title cost can be a large proportion of your overall cost of the car and can hit your bottom line. So just something to keep in mind if you're looking at this strategy. And then finally, safety issues. So obviously if you're hosting on Turo, you're responsible for providing a car which has fully capable safety kind of brakes, everything like that. So that's also why I've kept away from the shooter model, because if I'm renting a car out to a guest, I want to be 100% sure that the car is mechanically sound, and I would never want to be on the wrong side of kind of a liability lawsuit or anything like that if something did go wrong and the host was found to be at fault. So moving on to kind of the mid-tier model. So this is what I call the Steady-Eddy model, or reliable rentals. So purchasing cars for this model is around $10,000 to $15,000. So the cars which I would kind of use for this would be kind of the Toyota Camrys, Toyota Corollas, Honda Accords, stuff that is not luxury, but it definitely is a good quality car. So you can charge around $30 to $40 per day for these cars on the platform. You can have a bit lower amount of cars than with the shooter model, and they still have a high utilization rate. This is because you have both tourists and you have both locals who want this car. So pretty much with this strategy, you buy the car at say 40 to 50,000 miles, and you'll just keep renting the car out until it reaches the Turo mileage limit. And at that point, you would sell the car and potentially buy a new one with the proceeds. So the main positives of the mid-tier model is there's a good demand for it. There's constant demand for people who want these cars. Out of my fleet, the Toyota Camry and Corolla are the ones that are just constantly out back to back to back. There's great reliability on these cars. I've never had a breakdown, never had mechanical issues or any kind of issues at all with these cars. So there's a lot less of a headache. They have a good average amount of earnings. And if there is something to go wrong, Toyotas are pretty cheap to fix, a lot cheaper than kind of the high-end cars. So that's always good when thinking about that. These cars are also not performance driven. What I mean by that is the majority of people who are using these cars, they're not using them, they're not flooring them, they're not going very fast in them, and they're not putting a lot of strain on the engine. It's mainly kind of highway miles or people just commuting around the city. No one's going to be doing donuts in the parking lot in a Toyota Corolla. I hope not. And then finally, we're looking at the longest rentals. So with these cars, say in comparison to my other convertibles that I had, the cars tend to be rented out for a much longer period of time, which obviously reduces the workload and is exactly what you want as a host on Turo. Looking at some of the cons for the mid-tier model, so they do have a lower ROI compared to the shooter and of the high-end cars. There's still quite a big investment, $10,000 to $15,000. It's still quite a lot of money to be putting into a car that you're going to rent on a platform. And obviously you have a higher insurance cost than the shooter model. Finally, the large amount of cars that are on the Turo platform are kind of within this mid-tier model. So with that, there's a lot of competition for these cars, which can tend to reduce prices on the platform. So just keep that in mind when looking at the mid-tier model. Finally, we have the luxury kind of high-end rentals. So with the purchasing price, 20,000 is still kind of low for luxury or high end. That's where I would say it definitely starts, and it can go 20,000 to anything up to 100 to 120,000 dollars for the car. So the daily average price for this is about $65. These cars, if you were to use this model, you'd have less cars which are higher quality, and they tend to go out a bit less. So you're mainly catering to kind of tourists. Locals don't tend to rent this car as much unless it's a special occasion. So obviously the benefits of the higher tier model is much higher earnings per trip. So if you're looking to make as much money on Turo for the shortest amount of time possible, if you're preparing a car that rents out for $100 a day, in comparison to $20 a day, you're obviously going to make a lot more money per the amount of time that it takes to get the car ready. Secondly, you can use the car when it's not rented. Previously, when I had a 2018 Ford Mustang, I used to love driving the car, going to the beach, and when it wasn't rented by guests, it's a beautiful car to drive, and that's a great perk of owning it. Thirdly, you have a much higher quality of guests, and people who can afford these higher end cars tend to treat your car a lot better and just a lot nicer to deal with in general. And finally, if you have the higher tier model, you normally have better cars, but a lower amounts. So less cars equal less problems. There's less time managing the platform and everything that comes with being a host on Turo. So quite a lot of negatives with the high tier model. So firstly, my precious, if you have a brand new Tesla, or whatever it may be, it could be seriously frustrating if someone was to kind of put dings in it, dents in it, whatever it may be, and it could be below the threshold of what Turo would say you could claim on. Secondly, most likely you're going to get abuse from guests. If you have a Corvette, if you have a BMW, people want to go fast. People won't treat your car with a lot of respect, and they'll be flooring the car. So just keep that in mind. It's going to put a lot of wear and tear on your engine. If there was an issue to happen, these cars are notoriously high cost to repair. Normally are quite complicated, and they normally require to either go to the dealership or a specialist mechanic. So that also leads to higher insurance costs due to the high value, and your car will also depreciate a lot faster. A high-end car with a high amount of miles will depreciate a lot faster than a lower, cheaper car. The utilization rate can also vary depending on your market. If you're in a market that doesn't have a high demand for high-end cars, people may not want to rent it, and there's a lot less people who can afford to rent your car. And then finally, something which I've definitely learned is that more things go wrong. So if you have a convertible roof or you have all these different features, there's a lot more areas of the car that can be broken, and just take a lot more time to get fixed and be ready for renters. Alright guys, so as you know, my 3 cars which I currently have on the platform are Toyota Camry, Toyota Corolla, and Mazda Miata. I definitely find myself more interested in kind of the Steady-Eddy and mid-tier level cars. Just from my experience having kind of a high-end Ford Mustang or even the Mazda Miata, these cars tend to produce a lot more headaches in repairing and kind of maintenance than the Toyotas, and that's why I'm definitely focusing my energy on kind of the cars which are very reliable, will have constant demand from guests, and are always rented out. It's a strategy that's currently working very well for me, and it's the one that I would recommend to anyone looking to get started on Turo. However, let me know what you think. Are you guys using a different strategy? I'd love to hear from anyone using the shooter strategy. I know there's a lot of people out there with 30 to 40 cars, all being managed at once in the shooter, and I'd love to hear more about that if you have any insight on it. All right, that's everything for today. Until next time, thanks for watching.